started, I just want to welcome everyone today to the Strong Start Learning series. We're excited to have you with you. Excuse me, we're excited to have you with us for strong writing instruction in a virtual classroom. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay. Let her introduce herself and we'll get this party started.
Great, thanks everyone. Thanks, Bethany. So as Bethany said, my name is Lindsay Frigo. I am with Team GP. I'm a director of Team GP. I'm excited to support you all through our session today in developing writers in a virtual classroom. For those of you who have been to other sessions, we're on session 3 of our Strong Start Learning series. For those of you who are new today, welcome. So far, just to recap kind of where we've been and where we're going in our Strong Start Learning series, we started out with engaging students in rich text in a virtual classroom. Then we moved into close reading. Today, we're gonna dive deeper into thinking about developing writers in a virtual classroom. It's definitely something new and tricky for a bunch of us. And then 2 weeks from today, on October 21st at 3:30, we will dive deeper into fluency and volume of reading in a virtual classroom. So for those who are going through this series, we are going to be, through this series, exploring a variety of high leverage literacy practices, both for virtual, in-person, hybrid, whatever your learning environment looks like at this moment, which could change by the day, as we all know. We're going to connect key learning from the series to concrete examples from the materials that your district has adopted. And then we're also, like today and the previous sessions in 2 weeks, engage in these 75 minutes together to learn, collaborate, reflect, and also leave here with some concrete next steps on how we can apply some of this in our classrooms. So today, we have a few big goals. So I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds to just read our big goals for our objectives for today's session. All right, so we're just going to dive right in. So for those of you who have pre-registered, we asked you to bring a sample writing task and sample student writing samples. If for some reason you were not able to bring those, in the session materials that we have linked in the chat, you can find a sample of a writing task and a student work sample that you can kind of use to guide your discussion if you do not have your own. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by grounding our thinking in virtual writing instructions, our students, what we're doing for our students, what students are doing, how we're supporting their writing. So we're going to start by thinking about how student writing can reveal so much to us as teachers about our instructions, but more importantly about student learning. So what we're going to do is we're going to take just a few minutes, maybe about a minute or two, to kind of reflect on our samples on our own. So we're going to think about, was this a strong writing task for students? Why or why not? What knowledge or skills did your students demonstrate in this task? And what did you learn about your students' understanding of a text through this task? So I'm going to give you about a minute to kind of think through those questions on your own. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put you in breakout groups, totally random. You may not have the same may not be using the same curriculum as other people in your group, but this will just be an opportunity for you to share your reflections on the task and the student work samples that you brought. And then we'll come back together and reflect on that conversation. So you can take about the next minute to start reflecting, and then we will go into breakout rooms for about, let's say, 7 minutes. Doing good with the breakout sessions, breakout rooms?
Think
Perfect.
so. I think I'm ready to hit the button whenever you.
All right. Yep. We are ready whenever you are, Bethany. So we will see you all back in about 7 minutes and kind of share out what we discussed with those in our group.
All right, here we go.
Great.
All righty, I think that did it maybe.
You want to pop me into a breakout room too?
Will do.
Awesome. Thanks.
Reagan, what about you?
Sure. Yeah, why not? I'm very impressed, Bethany, that you've been able to navigate this because I feel like
I know.
a lot of
It's been
anxiety
really good.
usually.
Yes.
Well, I
Really
couldn't
good.
open the session without stumbling over my words, but hey, maybe I can do some breakout rooms. All right, here we go. Some of us have made it back.
It looks like just our group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody got splinched. I can use my Harry Potter reference. I love doing that. Here they go.
Here we go.
We didn't get to talk to everybody, did we, Sarah?
That's all right. We'll go back to breakout rooms.
Yeah, we're going to go back to the same breakout rooms to have an opportunity to chat in a few minutes too. So I'd love to just hear from those who were in the breakout rooms what you guys discussed, what teachers noticed about the task or about student responses to the task.
I thought it was interesting in our group. We've got the teachers that we did get to talk to are in transition. One is getting to go back to 100% with her students Monday, and she's expected to move on to Unit 2 with her new ELA text. And yet, you know, she's obviously a good and caring teacher because she was like, I want to follow up with this writing that I've got.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lori, kind of the same thing, you know, they're seeing the struggles of online writing and how to give good feedback to the students.
Yeah, and this is all the purpose of today, right? Thinking about how we can support writing in a virtual classroom because it is pretty tricky. Anyone else like to share? I don't want to necessarily call Ashley out, but Ashley was with us, Ashley Hughes, and it was pretty interesting to hear the task and then also hear the student response. So Ashley, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about what you noticed about what the task was asking your student, how kind of the student responded. And I think that last question around what did you learn about the student's understanding of a text, I thought was a good place for us to start also.
Okay, so the unit itself is doll and narrative. I'm using Amplify. And so obviously we're talking about narrative writing. And the end task is actually an informative essay. But one of the first lessons it was lesson 2, the writing that I had for my student. And we were focusing on precise details. I'm sorry, was there, did I miss something?
That's perfect. Yeah, so they were focusing on precise details. It wasn't necessarily linked to a text is what you shared. It was more them sharing an experience they had and trying to that experience using those precise details of what they experienced, what they saw, what they felt, what they smelled, et cetera, et cetera. Anyone else want to share anything that they noticed about the task or what they learned about the student knowledge? Or what they learned about the students learning through that task?
I found that a lot of my students have forgotten a lot of just basic things about ELA. My 7th graders coming in that had not had me before, they did an argumentative task and They did not put evidence at all. And I know that's something that they've just forgotten since we haven't been there. So I guess I took for granted that how much they would remember. So I feel like I kind of need to start back further than I even thought.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think over the next few slides, we'll have an opportunity to see what we think high quality writing should include. And then with that lens, we'll have an opportunity to look closer at this task a little bit more and see what we might want to change. So yeah, so when we're looking at student work, student writing, we're learning about the students' skills, what they know and what they understand. And we really learn about their learning by the tasks that we put in front of them. So it's really important that we're creating opportunities for students to demonstrate meaningful learning. And we want this learning, whenever possible, to be based on a text. So I think that for writing, we often overlook it as teachers. We believe that having these really high expectations to have students write a succinct, thoughtful paragraph, maybe too much for students to do, they would struggle. But I think that we need to remember that writing really allows students to spend time expressing their thoughts and learning how to express their thoughts in a way other than speaking. And for us as teachers, it provides us so much information. It gives us insight into their performance, their strengths, their areas for growth, their personal voice comes through for their writing, all of which is really, really important. And I think as teachers, it can take a big mindset shift to move from skills-based instruction to using these high quality materials that allow students to dive deep into meaningful practice of multiple skills by using a strong text. So we also have to remember, I know that we often think that writing is used to assess, right? We assess learning through writing tasks, but we have to remember that writing, in fact, is the learning, right? By putting tests in front of students where they're learning, we're learning as teachers about their learning. So it's not just a way to assess learning, but really to help with the learning. So that's something we really need to remember. So I think I wanted to share this quote. This is a teacher we worked with in Tennessee, and this teacher could not believe how much of a shift she saw in student performance after implementing a rigorous standards aligned curriculum. In this case, she used core knowledge. So she says, yeah.
So can you share your screen again? I think maybe it popped out when we were in breakout rooms.
You're not seeing anything? What are you guys seeing right now? Uh-oh.
Just our participant.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Pretty faces. I see everybody's pretty faces.
Okay, so let me make sure. Thank you for letting me know. Let's do this. Give me 1 second. This. 1 second, guys. Thanks for bearing with me, and thank you for letting me know that you don't see anything, because that. 1 second, guys. Share screen. We want you to see is that, you seeing it now? Okay. All right. Whoo! I always get nervous with the technology. I got through that one. So that's good. So you guys heard me though talk about this teacher. So I just wanted to share this quote with her reflection on using a rigorous curriculum. In this case, it was core knowledge. So she said, "I've seen the biggest difference in my students' writing. I've always loved writing and felt successful at it. Now I realize I hadn't even scratched the surface of what my kids can do. All of my kids can write descriptive paragraphs with facts, thoughtful intros, and conclusions. By trusting the process, it has enabled all of us to be successful." So I thought that was a really good quote from a teacher to how she reflected on how using a strong curriculum and strong materials has changed her students' writing performance, really. Guys, see the screen still, right? We're good? Perfect. So in order to learn writing, we need strong writing tasks and an opportunity for students to demonstrate meaningful learning about text. So we're going to look at some criteria of what high quality writing should include. So writing tests, they should be text-based and knowledge focused. You guys also have this on your first page of your participant packet if you need to review it later. There should be a purpose and an audience, should be aligned to standards. So we should balance the three types of writing: argumentative, informative, narrative. There should be research even in early grades. We should be writing to sources, increase sophistication, address those grade level language standards, demonstrate student ownership of thinking, and opportunities for feedback from both their peers and also obviously from their teacher. So really thinking about that our opportunities for student writing should include these things. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, you can turn the page in your participant packet, and there is going to be a sample task that we are going to look at. So this task is from a writing test from My Perspectives, grade 8. So based on those criteria that we just talked about on the previous slide, which you also can look at in your notes, how does this task that you see align to that criteria? I'll give you a minute or so to kind of just review, and then I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you see in this task that align to those criteria, including that it is text-based and knowledge focused. It has a purpose. It's aligned to standards. Students demonstrate their, take ownership of their thinking, and there's opportunity for feedback. So I want you to start thinking about that, and feel free to just hop right in when you have some responses to share. Or you can feel free to put some in the chat as well. And if it's easier, we could just focus first on, is this writing text-based? Is this writing task text-based, excuse me? Yep, it says based on the details of the story, I saw someone say. Yep. Prediction.
I remember this task because I was working on the 8th grade curriculum, and I remember having a little bit of a problem with it because I didn't feel like they had to use the text as much as they normally do. I mean, kind of, but I could see how kids would not use the text is what I would be afraid of.
So what might you do as a teacher to ensure that they are?
I would say,
actually, you know what? Don't answer that, because we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. I'm going to stop you right there. I'm jumping ahead. I'm just getting super excited to talk about this. So hold that thought. So yeah, we see that there's text-based writing. There is text-based writing task up here, right? We're asking them, we're referring to the short story that they just read, and we're asking them to use their knowledge to then write a response. And what about a clear purpose and audience? Anyone want to point out where they might see that? So here we see, right? We see that there's elements of an informative speech. There's a clear purpose and audience. They're writing an informative speech, written from the character's perspective. And then the speech is to be presented. Yes, point of view is given. Perfect. And then here we can see that it hits on those variety of types of writing, right? Today we're writing informative speech. There might be another day where we're hopefully focusing on a different type of writing to ensure we're having all of those types of writing. And then we have opportunities for students to share their own voice, perspective, and analysis of the text, which is really, really important. And then here we're focusing on those language standards, right? we want them to use those variety of transitions, follow formal style as it states in the 8th grade learning language standards. So I think those are things that are really important to think about. And when you're looking at writing tests, I want you to be looking at it with that lens, asking yourself those questions. Is it text-based, right? Does it hit on the language standards? Is there opportunity for feedback? Is there a purpose, an audience, things like that, to make sure that the writing test is really aligned to what to the most rigorous of standards it can be for students. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have an opportunity to return back to that writing task and that student response that we looked at in our first breakout room. So now that you've had an opportunity to reflect on kind of what we believe as the quality of or criteria of the high quality writing, I want you to look at it through that lens. So how does this writing task align to those criteria for high quality writing? And what else could you do or add to this instruction or to this assignment to better align to these criteria? So what kind of modifications might you make to ensure that we're hitting on these criteria? So Bethany is going to pop us back into those same breakout rooms, and we're going to stay in those breakout rooms for about, let's do 6 minutes again, so we can 6 minutes this time, so we can have some time to chat as a whole group after. And just using this opportunity to look at that writing task again, but now through the lens of the quality, the criteria for quality writing that we talked about in previous slides. So Bethany, whenever you're ready, you can pop us back into those groups.
Hang on, here we go.
Awesome, thanks guys.
I think we have everybody back.
Perfect, great. So I would love to hear from you. Now that you had those criteria for high quality writing, what did you notice about the task, or what might you change about the tasks having those criteria in the back of your mind? Or if something else came up that seemed really insightful, I'd love to hear that too.
Lindsay, it came up in our group. It was kind of toward the end. And it makes me think of demonstrate student ownership and opportunities for feedback. You know, it is challenging to try to translate some of this in this virtual setting, but can we as teachers reflect on, do I see evidence of what I know I was able to do with my students in their writing? Like I might not be able to see everything I would want to see if I was, you know, if I were with them in person, but am I able to see what, you know, how did my instruction really impact their learning? What evidence do I see in their writing that gives me some kind of cue as to how my instruction did as a whole in terms of what they're able to do on their own?
Yeah. Did anything come up about tasks that may not have been aligned to a text, or that there wasn't a text at all? Did that come up in any groups? I know it came up in my group. I don't know if it came up in other groups, and what, like, any ideas you had for that? So I know in my group specifically, it was, I believe, 6th grade, yeah, 6th grade Amplify, and it was more of a student experience, student reflecting on an experience they had, and there wasn't a text at all included in the task. So we kind of thought about, well, how could we change that? What could we bring in? And I don't know if anyone from my group wanted to share some ideas they had, or for anyone from any group had ideas of how to link that to a text or some sort of something that the students have an opportunity to look at or read through.
Well, we kind of, I was in Lindsay's group, so we were talking about the prompt that was really just based on student experience and a really vivid memory that they had, or an experience that they had. And we didn't know that was such an individual experience, and not being 100% familiar with the unit. I've worked with that before, but I can't remember what texts are in the unit, but just thinking about
the possibility of adding in a mentor text if that was possible, just so that students could have a model for how to write about a memory, even though their memories are going to be different and not actually based on a text, if that makes sense. Just looking at some of the strategies that they could use in their own writing from the mentor text, using something like a quick write handbook is what we talked about. But we were really trying to, and we got cut off because we had to return to the main group, but really trying to work through how we could incorporate more text-based other than just the mentor text into that prompt, which was a really student-specific narrative prompt.
Well, and I think something that we didn't get to talk about, and I feel bad because I wasn't able to talk. But now that I can, I was thinking too, sometimes it's not just it's not just where the end result is, because sometimes we want to be at the finish line, and we're maybe just a quarter of the way done with the race if you compare the year to a race. And looking at what we've taught in the objectives leading up to this writing task could maybe support sort of the features that need to be present for students to be considered proficient, which not that I enjoy this, but maybe I do more than I should. I love marking things like they don't have to have this mastered and they don't have to have this mastered. It almost is freeing in a sense that it gives me permission to focus on the skills that I focused on in reading that align to that task. So being able to not just adjust the assignment to better align the criteria, but being able to adjust my thinking about what needs to be present for kids to be proficient can be freeing, because if I think, oh gosh, we're in October, we may not have to be where I'm wanting them to be at the end of this year, which gives me an opportunity to feel grateful for the things that I have taught that they've learned. It's hard for teachers to give themselves credit for what they've taught, because we want them to be ready to be proficient like as soon as they have their second or third writing prompt. But sometimes I feel like it's really kind of a balance of understanding we're a quarter of the way done with the year, and we've only probably covered like really well, especially in this challenging environment, like maybe 2 objectives. What are we really looking for kids to have grasped, and give them credit for that, and give ourselves credit for that in terms of instruction, because all of those pieces can't be present. I hope that it made sense, but that's just kind of what I was thinking about. It's this idea of where we are in the year too, like taking that into consideration in terms of what kids need to be proficient with, or at least moving in that direction with, that we've taught, which is kind of freeing because we realize, oh, we've only really covered 10 objectives or 12 objectives or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I think definitely thinking really clearly about when you're giving a test to students, what you want to see them be able to show you that they know. It doesn't have to be everything, what specific things you're focusing on. And before we go into planning, we'll talk a little bit about thinking through a student exemplar response, what you would want to see them show you. And it doesn't have to be everything. And if they show you some other things, great. But what are you really going to focus on, I think is really important. So we're going to, just for the sake of time, I want us to look back at that. I want us to look back at this task. So this is the My Perspective tasks. So it's come up today. It's come up in previous sessions. It's constantly being discussed in all things education this year. It's tricky doing stuff in a virtual environment, right? Writing especially is tricky. Thinking about how we're giving feedback. If we can give feedback, what way we're giving feedback. So when we think about this task, so you can look back on the second page of your participant packet. When we're looking at this example from My Perspectives, reflect on how you might maintain this high quality writing opportunity in a virtual classroom. Any ideas of what you might want to think about ensuring that you're doing, what it could look like? Any examples are fine. I'll break it down a little bit further on some thoughts that I had over like the course of a week, what it could look like. But I would love to hear from you guys, either stuff that you've done that have been really successful, and or things you think you might do in relation to this task, knowing that we're in a virtual setting. And we can even get more specific if we want to. in terms of like when we think about this, what things might we want students to do on their own or asynchronously, and what stuff might we want to do synchronously when we're together, when we're live with students or groups of students. That might be a better way to approach it. Any thoughts?
Lindsay, one that my group talked about was, I don't see it on the slide as much as I see it in the packet, but the launch text, like, is there a way to, as a teacher, whether asynchronously or together, really capitalize on the fact that that's there and help kids deconstruct that launch text or mentor text, or whatever we want to call it, so they can see what this thing my teacher is asking me to do actually looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I don't know if this answers your question, Lindsay, but just to kind of piggyback on what Sarah and Bethany have both said, Anne Brooke mentioned a mentor text, but dissecting something to show them, even down to the language standards. Grammar is not going to matter to them unless they can put it to use and they see it used. So if we could start with that first, and you can do that virtually now with all of our tools. We could totally do that virtually, share our screen and say, here's why they did this, here's why they did that, and why do you think they did this? I had a discussion today with an 8th grade teacher about phrases and clauses, and I said, no, you don't teach them in and of themselves. You got to teach them in the writing. What's the purpose of them? It's not so that we can name a noun clause, it's so that we can use. So anyway, I know I'm getting sidetracked, but if we could do the model or the mentor text first and show them how somebody else used it, then they might feel more equipped to do it on their own.
Yeah. Well,
Tracy,
no, go ahead, Brooke. No, Brooke, go ahead.
I was going to say, I saw a teacher doing a really beautiful job of something similar to that this week, just utilizing Google Docs, and she had shared a sample student text, and I'm sure that she had lessons leading up to that in which she used her document camera and she went through and she was modeling for them. But then she sent that student text out, just made a copy for each student, and then she had narrative techniques that they had gone over, and she was having them just go through and kind of use different colors to highlight different narrative techniques that they were recognizing in that student text on their own Google Doc. And I don't know if they had the opportunity to then compare with others, but she was teaching virtual and in-person students at the same time, and everyone was working on their own Google Doc and working on that. So one really good way to use technology for that.
Love it. It makes it more personal to them, especially when it's a peer. Yes, love it.
Yeah. I think you guys are all spot on things we can do. And obviously it will be different depending on what technology capabilities we have, whether we have kids solely in person or hybrid, whatever it may be. But yes, so I kind of started exactly what you guys were saying, right? So I'm assuming that at this point, so on the first day, on Monday, that students would then reread the model launch text. We would have had an opportunity to dive into it together. And then on their own, students would reread this text on their own and then complete some sort of guided notes handout that as a teacher we would create or that the curriculum comes with, and then engage in some sort of discussion on a maybe a Google Classroom discussion board or something else. And use a prompt. What are the elements of an informative text? What makes this an effective informative text? So that they, like you all said, can see a sample of it before they dive into it themselves. And that can be done on their own, and then they could have that collaborative discussion online. So when we think about asynchronous, again, it's students doing things not at the same time, on their own at different times. And then synchronous, come together all live like this. And so then on Tuesday, they would complete this gather evidence table and then post this table in a shared Google Drive ahead of time so that we could all see it. And then we would have small group Zoom breakout rooms, or if you're not able to do small groups, there are other ways you can do it as well. I know that in some discussions I've had, there are some schools that are not allowing small breakout groups. But then we can have an opportunity for students to share the evidence they collected. And then the teacher and then peers can provide feedback to evaluate evidence. on the evidence that they gathered in their pre-work. So that is another way to then build out this writing task. And then the next day, let's say on Wednesday, we would go back to students doing things asynchronously. So students doing things on their own. They would complete an outline and graphic organizer to start to plan out this speech. And they would post it to like a Google Classroom or whatever platform you're using. And then they would be able to sign up for a small one-on-one session with the teacher to discuss and get feedback on the outline. And something that I'll talk about a little bit later, but something I really want to hit home with is we want to make sure that when we can, we're providing feedback in that synchronous live forum. And if for some reason you're using some sort of portal or something that your curriculum has where you're providing feedback at a later time, at night or whenever, just make sure that you're allotting time to provide that feedback and discuss that feedback with a student or group of students live, because it comes it's so inherent when you're in person, but when you're online, it's easy to forget about that. So just remembering so that students can internalize that feedback and you can have that kind of open discussion. And then as we move along, we would have students start to actually do the work, draft their speeches, post those speeches in the Google Classroom, and then continue to set up those one-on-one 15-minute-ish times with teachers to discuss the draft and get some feedback. And if the teacher had to give feedback offline, then using that time to really dive into the feedback that was given previously. So if you're not able to provide that feedback and you only have maybe, let's say, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, give feedback ahead of time and then just dive right into focusing on the most important feedback when you're one-on-one live with that student. And then the next time we come together, students might have some pre-work where they're utilizing the checklist to revise and edit that speech and start to make those revisions and track changes in their Google document, and then come together synchronously all together live and join those small groups and start to read their speech aloud to like a peer reviewer or someone that will give them some feedback, and the peer can use the checklist to start to give them really pointed feedback, because obviously we want to make sure that when we're providing feedback student to student, we're really clear with what they should be focusing on, so we don't go on a tangent, which sometimes students could. And then, you know, the next day, students would start to present their speech on some sort of platform. Maybe it would be Flipgrid. And then you would have them watch maybe 2 or 3 peers and respond to their videos. So I think something like I mentioned, you want to ask yourself, what do students need immediate feedback on? And how can I make sure, not only with writing, but with everything, that I'm able to give them feedback synchronously, meaning live, or at least review the feedback I gave online asynchronously in a quick one-on-one session so that they can actually internalize the feedback and ask questions about the feedback that I as the teacher gave them. So that's like a lot of information, and that is just a sample, and there would be a lot of variations depending on platforms you have access to, the writing task itself, but that is kind of a way to break it down and ensure that there's consistent feedback, ensure that we're breaking it down in a way that students can be successful in eventually completing the task in a way that is in line with the objective or the expectations. I'd love to just hear any responses or thoughts you have about this, any questions you have, because this is tricky, trying to figure out how to really break it down in a way that would translate to a virtual classroom. And since that was a lot of information, I made sure that it's also in your packet so you could review it, because that was a lot. But any quick thoughts before we dive into our own planning and start to think this through in our own specific instance?
Lindsay, there's some really good comments in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Lindsay.
Thank you, guys. Yes.
Lindsay, there's really
okay. Thank you, guys. I keep forgetting about the chat because it's popping up. Thank you guys so much. Yes. yeah, making sure that teachers are really clear with students what they're looking for, what the expectations are, is really important. Great. Some great comments here. Just reviewing them. Yeah,
Checklist
awesome.
is a really good way to help students have those expectations from the teacher. And you can actually attach a rubric on your Google Classroom assignments. You can create your own custom rubric there and do that. So I think that would be really great. Or even just making, I know some people just would prefer a checklist. So making a Google Doc to share out with that and attach it to the assignment, I think would be great. I know a lot of middle school teachers love that.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I think making sure that there's a rubric so that students are really clear with what we're expecting of them, and also just really hitting home on that feedback piece, making sure that students are understanding the feedback we're giving them. So prioritizing having that face-to-face discussion with them. Grammar checklist, yep. So I think all of these things are spot on. So what we're going to do now, just in the interest of time, to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to then take kind of this framework and these criteria of high quality writing that we've talked about so far, take it back to something that they will be teaching themselves. So what I want you to do is we're going to go into curriculum specific breakout rooms so you can speak with others who use the same curriculum as you. And you also have this planning protocol on the last page of your participant packet, your notes, where you can start to write some things down here, should that be helpful. So you're going to review an upcoming task in your materials. Think about how does that writing task align to the criteria for high quality writing that we talked about earlier that is also in your notes. What knowledge or skills will students demonstrate through this writing task? So you want to be thinking about what would an exemplar student response look like? What would you want to see have in that response? And like I believe Sarah said earlier, what are like the non-negotiables that you want to make sure you're seeing from students, and any added things? Great. It just tells you more as a teacher about where your students are. And then what virtual platforms do you use and will you use to engage students in this writing task? And how will you kind of break this writing task down like I did over the course of a week? What different platforms might you use? What might you do synchronously all together live, or asynchronously where students are working on their own? And then also remember to ask yourself, what do students need immediate feedback on? When and how am I planning to provide that feedback to them if it can't be live? And then what next steps do I need to take to plan for this writing task? What other things will I need to make sure that I create, whether it be a Google form or questions to a Padlet or whatever platforms or different things that you may use. So what I want us to do now is break out into our groups. We have about 15 minutes to do that, which will be perfect, and have an opportunity to think this through. And it may be helpful to share kind of what your task is and what your thoughts are, or even collaborate together if you have a similar upcoming task that you're going to be teaching. So Bethany, I think whenever you're ready, you can break us up into curriculum specific groups and we'll dive right into our planning.
Very cool. All right. I think I've got this squared away on the back end. Here's breakout.
Okay, perfect.
If you end up, teachers, if you end up in a breakout room that's not the right curriculum, just message me and I can easily move you, pull you out of one and put you in the other. Okay. Here we go.
I wish Lori could have talked to Tina. Is it Tina? Yeah. I wish I could have gotten Lori and Tina together.
Okay, guys, thank you. I was able to join both so I'm glad I was able to do that. Any like quick, just in the interest of time, big takeaways that came up in your discussion? I'd love to just hear that quickly before we close our time out together.
Our group had some good discussion about backwards planning and how helpful that is to kind of look toward the end of the series of lessons or unit and then try to see how the individual lessons kind of all come together to help you meet the expectations outlined in, let's say, an end of unit assessment or task.
Yeah, that's great. And then the Amplify group that I was in for the first half, we talked a little bit about peer review and peer feedback and how it's really important to make sure we're specific with students so that they're focusing on the right things when they're giving feedback to their peers is really important as well. Any one or two last things you guys want to share about how either the planning process went or things that came up, or thinking about how to then make this really rich for a virtual platform?
I think one of the things that I always love about discussing writing and hearing conversation about writing is we really are so limited in what it is we focus and provide kids feedback on. And I think it really is about identifying those key pieces we want kids to show proficiency with instructionally, and then really giving them feedback after we've taught those things in short chunks in the quick writes, and then in bigger pieces when we think about putting it all together with the end of the unit writing task. Because we want to look at everything, and that writing rubric from our state is pretty deep. And so when we think about that, it's part of our job to help reframe that for our students. What is their next step so that they can do better as someone who's writing to communicate their thoughts? And I think we try sometimes to eat the whole elephant, and it's really about digesting small chunks and making sure they have what it is we have been intentional about teaching. And that's hard because that means we have to recognize there are things we weren't able to teach. And sometimes that's hard to let go of too, but I wish it could feel more freeing.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for really rich discussion today and thinking about how we can make sure we're focusing on the right things when we're putting writing tests in front of students, and also making sure that we're making it really purposeful, even in a virtual world, because it is not easy. So I really appreciate you having the opportunity to engage with me and being thoughtful around your practice around how you might support teachers, coaches. Thank you for that. So just really quickly, in the interest of time, if you could just maybe in the chat, think about one thing you learned, one thing you're energized about, or one thing you're committing to. And then I'm just going to quickly preview that our next session, which will be our final session, our fourth session of the Strong Start Learning series, will be 2 weeks from today. And we're going to be talking about fluency. And that is really exciting because that is something that is often not thought of as something that is important in middle school. But I can guarantee you that it is not the case. So I'm really excited to talk more about that in 2 weeks. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Bethany, and she'll reach out to me, or your coach, and they'll reach out to me. But just before you sign off, if you could just go back to one of these final closing prompts and just give us your thoughts, that would be great. And after the session today, we'll make sure the slides are up on the website also, so you can review and reach out with any questions. So thank you all. We really appreciate it. I hope this was purposeful, and I'm looking forward to diving deep into fluency with you all in a few weeks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing your expertise and facilitating just a great discussion about writing. I see some folks commenting in the chat, so we can check those out. I also dropped the session survey in the chat a couple times. It's a tiny URL. So if you'll take just a moment to complete that, we'd be really grateful for your feedback.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, especially those of you that joined on your fall break. Talk about dedication.
Yes. Thank you all so much. Talk to y'all soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, ladies. Hey, Bethany, are you all planning on sending out certificates once all 4 sessions are done, or how exactly is that going to work?
Yes, on our end, just to be honest, it was just a little easier to think about it kind of as a batch kind of at the end. So yes, we'll be in touch after that 4th session.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked.
Bye now.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from anyone before we sign out? All righty then. I think we'll call it a day. Thanks again, Lindsay. Thank you, coaches. Great facilitative work there in those breakout rooms. Bye, everybody.